College and this evening's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Tonight our subject is the social history of women within the United States. To discuss this subject with us is a person who has many years' experience and educational background in the field of this very important topic. Our guest is Dr. Marjorie Nelson. Dr. Nelson holds a bachelor's degree in the field of sociology from the University of Akron and a PhD in the same field from the University of New York at Buffalo. She has also taught at Antioch College in the state of Ohio. At the present time, she is completing a book for publication entitled Ladies in the Street, which is a discussion of the social history of the National Women's Party. At the present time, she is also touring the United States in an attempt to understand this and other social movements by interviewing a number of personalities. At the present time, she is in Spokane to interview and to deal with the question of the Yvonne Wanrow trial of the Colville tribe that so many of you have heard about. She is going to answer the questions of the panel and myself this evening, mainly upon the question of social history of women, but also we will deal with how this relates to other social movements in our country. Dr. Nelson, it's a pleasure having you on our program.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Joining with me tonight in interviewing our guests will be three panel members. First of all will be Dr. Les Hogan, who has a doctorate from Washington State University and is Dean of Students at North Idaho College. Welcome, Dr. Hogan.
Thank you, Tony.
Secondly, a regular member of our panel, Mary Lou Reed, holding a bachelor's degree from Mills College in California and did her graduate work in religion at Columbia University. Welcome, Lou.
Thank you, Tony.
And our third panel member this evening will be Mr. Bob Brown, who is a graduate with a bachelor's degree in political science from Texas Tech and is now the Director of Placement Services at North Idaho College. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you, Tony.
We'll proceed to questions at once, and the first series will come from Dr. Les Hogan.
Dr. Nelson, I should probably say right from the beginning that I kind of feel like I should go back to the college days and, so to speak, sit at your feet and listen to all the things you've learned, because you're really very prominent in the field, and I'm impressed with the many articles and books that you have written. But I will start by asking you, if I may, as a social historian, and because you have written extensively about the history of women's suffrage, possibly we might start, you can give us a little bit of background in the area of women's suffrage and the things that you've found out in your research.
The thing that has impressed me the most about the women's suffrage movement is the strength that it got by its being allied with other movements. The women's suffrage movement actually grew out of the abolition movement, the movement to end slavery. And it got its strength with its concern about the conditions of working women, so that it was aligned with the labor movement. And in the first part of this century, when suffrage was finally passed, the suffrage movement was very strongly allied with the labor movement, particularly the movement to pass protective labor legislation for women. And it was also aligned with the movement for suffrage for blacks. The group that I was most interested in, the National Women's Party, the group that my book is about, the Ladies in the Streets, they were the militant women of that movement. And they were the group that was trying to get a federal suffrage amendment. And that meant universal suffrage. Now, that meant that they were talking about suffrage in the South. And by the turn of the century, although the black man had won the vote in 1868, he essentially had lost it again. The Reconstruction was over. The men who had been, the blacks who'd been in the Congress were no longer there. A lot of grandfather clauses and laws had been passed in the South to deprive the black man of the vote. So when these women started talking about suffrage for women, they were raising the issue of suffrage for everybody in the South, and they got support from the blacks for doing that. So it's the intersection It's not just a movement for white middle-class women, which we often hear about. I mean, I think there's a lot of criticism of the women's movement along those lines, that it's only concerned with the women who already have a lot of privilege. And I don't think that's true historically.
Lou Reed.
Dr. Nelson, whom do you see as some of the giants of the women's suffrage movement? Who are some of your favorites that you have studied along the way?
Well, everybody knows about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, but I don't think as many people know about Alice Paul, who was the woman who really started the National Woman's Party in 1913, and also was the woman who wrote the Equal Rights Amendment. And I had the pleasure and the privilege of living with Alice Paul in Washington. I lived there for a year at the headquarters of the National Woman's Party. And I went, this is 1970, and I had gone back to school, to get my degree in my PhD in sociology, and I was looking for a topic for my dissertation, and I wanted it to be important. I didn't just want to do a study. I wanted to do something that I wanted to find out about and that would be a contribution. So I went down to Washington, D.C., and went to the Library of Congress, and I'd heard about these little old women who were living on the Hill in Washington, and this was what was still living. The National Woman's Party is still there. And I called over there, and Alice Paul answered the phone. She was about 88 years old, and she said, "Oh, it's marvelous that you want to study us, but you must come early in the morning because we have a lot of work to do." And I thought, oh boy, I'm going to get such a great book out of this, and I'm just going to sit at her feet and listen. So I got there. My 12-year-old son was with me at the time, and we went over at 8 o'clock the next morning. We went in, and it was like walking into another world, to walk into the Woman's Party. It's right on Capitol Hill, and it was an ivy-covered historic mansion. And you walked in the front door, and there were marble busts of Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott and Susan B. Anthony, and a huge statue of Joan of Arc. And immediately, I had a sense that I'd never had before in my life, a sense of pride in being a woman. The women's movement is older now, and we see pictures of women doing things, but I didn't know, I didn't have this sense of pride at this time. I was still looking. I was really searching. So we walked into the Women's Party, and Alice Paul was sitting there, and she was on the telephone talking to people about passing the Equal Rights Amendment. And this was just before it passed the House of Representatives. And she said, if you want to study our party, you have to work with us. You'll never understand us unless you work with us. And that very morning, she sent me over to the House to talk to my representatives. She wanted to know who my representatives in Congress were. And I'd never done any lobbying before in my life. But she sent me over. Peter and I went over. My son and I went over. And I stayed for a year. And I continued to do this kind of work, lobbying for the Equal Rights Amendment. And then I spent the rest of the day studying the archives of the party.
I read a little story once about Alice Paul. Is she still alive, or did she just?
She just died.
She
died this summer.
Died. Mm-hmm. But she more or less, and she and her workers sort of kept this flame alive in between 1920 and the resurgence. How did she feel about the revival of the women's movement? Was she very, very proud, or did they feel that some of them had perhaps gone unappreciated, or did they welcome the revival?
She welcomed the revival. It was like the troops have arrived when the women began coming in. There were other women in the Women's Party who'd come in later, who had not been part of the suffrage movement, who were not quite as appreciative particularly were not as appreciative of the young women who came in their blue jeans, and they didn't really like that very much. But Alice Paul was a political organizer, probably one of the greatest I've ever known. And she took anybody, and not just women. A friend of mine, a gentleman from the University of Buffalo, came down to see me, and he walked in, and she had him going over to visit his congressman to talk about the Equal Rights Amendment.
Well, your title, Ladies in the Streets, implies that the ladies really were out in the streets, and this was the tactic in the early years of the suffrage movement. Do you feel that the more political sophistication that Alice developed and has been used now is a better method, or would you suggest that maybe the women in the early 1900s had some better tactics that could be used well by women now? Should there be a little bit more drama? And should there also be an attempt to maybe reach out and make more alliances, as you were suggesting with the labor and with other groups?
The symbolism of the ladies in the streets was primarily that the way, I believe that the way that women are discriminated against, or one of the most powerful methods of discrimination, is in depriving women of access to public space so that women are not seen publicly. And that's the symbolism of the streets. The woman in the streets, the street walker is a prostitute. And the idea, and it's still true today, the woman who was raped is asked, why was she there? You know, not why did the man do it, but why was she there, as though she should not have been. And it's still true today that the woman does not have access to the streets at night. She doesn't feel free to walk down the streets at night, and she doesn't feel free to walk down some streets in the daytime. And so these women, their tactic was to be very public. It wasn't to be rabble-rousers, because they were not rabble-rousers. They were ladies. They were very much ladies, and they dressed up in their white dresses, and their manners were beautiful, and they comported themselves beautifully, but they were there, and they were visible. And that was the symbolism of the ladies in the streets. And I think that is still true today. I think that women we become proud when we see other women doing things. You know, if we see women, like it was such a nice thing to walk in today and see a woman producing this television show, Pat Richard, that makes me feel proud to be a woman. And I wish we should have more women in our Congress. We should have a woman president. We should have women in the churches. You know, that does something for our own self-esteem. And that's the sense in which I think we still need to be pushing. It's not a matter, but it's important, I think, that we're not talking about any kind of hysterical screaming, you know, running up and down the streets. I'm just talking about being there.
Visibility.
Bob Brown.
I know that you were involved with the Joanne Little case. Would you explain to the viewers, perhaps, briefly what was involved in that case and how that ties up with your being in Spokane
Okay.
in the last couple of months?
I went down to work on Joanne Little's case. Joanne Little is a black woman who was in jail, and while she was in jail in North Carolina, she was raped by her jailer, and she fought back. He had come in and threatened her with an ice pick, and she got hold of the ice pick, and she fought back, and she killed him. And she was on trial for her life. She was charged with murder. And my daughter works for the National Jury Project. I have 3 children. One of my daughters works for the National Jury Project. And that's the group that goes in and does surveys of the community to see whether, in fact, a person can get a fair jury trial. And a great deal of money was raised for Joanne's trial through the Southern Poverty Law Center. And because they had raised that kind of money, they were able to do surveys of the entire state of North Carolina to begin a change of venue, to move the trial from the little county in which Joanne was in jail, where she simply could not have gotten a fair trial. The people in the town, the whites were all members of the jailer's family, and the blacks were all terrified, and they weren't on the jury rolls. So they want a change of venue, and that's what my daughter was doing. And she called me and she said, hey Mom, you feminists, we need you, that there's a lot of work to be done, as there always is in any trial. I mean, it's not just the big trials. Every trial, there's a lot of work to be done, and everybody who is working to defend themselves in this system needs a lot of help. But there are some trials that receive more publicity, and so they get more help. Anyway, Barbara said, please come and help us. And so I went down there, and what I was doing was talking to people, primarily trying to fill the courtroom, because believe it or not, the courtroom was empty. people were talking about the case all over the country, but in Raleigh, the courtroom was empty. And I believe, as many other people do, that you're going to get a fairer trial if the courtroom is full. If the people of the community, not the outsiders, if the people in the community are sitting there watching, that you just get a fairer trial. So that's what I was doing in North Carolina. Well, my daughter came up here to do some jury work for Yvonne Wanro's trial. And once again, I talked to her, and she said, "You feminists, you know, where are you in Spokane?" And, and as a matter of fact, there are a lot of people supporting Yvonne here in Spokane, but the people who were doing the work on the trial didn't know how to get in touch with them. And so I came here in the first week of September to talk with people in the community who were concerned. I mean, I'm not creating the concern, it's already here. I'm just working with the people who are concerned that Yvonne have a fair trial, or even more to the point, that the trial be dismissed, that the charges be dismissed, because there's a number of us who think that there's no way justice can be served by keeping that woman, by trying that woman again. She has been through a great deal, and she was defending herself. She was defending her children from a man who was a known child molester who came into the house where her children were. And she shot him, and that was a terrible thing. I don't ever condone murder. But she shot him in an effort to defend herself. And she was a small woman in a cast, her leg was in a cast, and he was a big man, and he was there, and he walked in, and she shot him, and she's on trial for murder. And
Dr. Nelson, I know that in addition to these two cases you're talking about, the Little case and the Wanro case, that you have, not only from your educational background, teaching and going to school in different states, you've toured in the country, and you've talked to lots of people from not only women, but both men and women from poor backgrounds in particular, and what's happening. Now that you've had some months to do this, how would you, in a summation at this point, I know you're not through with your studies or work, but how would you describe America in relation to different groups of people in our country and the status that they have within their communities? The findings that you have, are they encouraging or discouraging? Or what's happening in relation, not to what you've been talking about concerning the National Women's Party so much as individuals in our society? What kind of progress is being made about producing a just society?
I think one of the things that I've seen happening in the last 5 years, is that I think a lot of the illusions that people had about this country are gone. And now I'm talking about the middle class, I'm not talking about the poorer people. I think that a lot of people are beginning to realize that they have a responsibility to be active for the society. And I think the problem that people are having, these people who are aware that they have, that they're responsible, we're all responsible for our society, is how to organize, is what to do. I mean, I think that's the big problem that people have not solved. People do not know how to get together with other people, what to do, what to say, where to go. And I think people are talking about this, and I wish they'd talk more about it to each other, not to any, I don't think this is any big thing. I think it's a matter of sitting down with the people that you know and say, how can we be effective? And really use our heads, really brainstorm it. But I think there's a great deal of awareness of what our problems are. I've been encouraged, particularly of the women's movement. I think that there are a lot of women being active in their own behalf. They're not being written about. You don't see them on television, but they're there. They're in the communities. And for instance, women are organizing houses for battered women. There's a lot of service kinds of work going on. Women are active in the churches. They're working very hard. Women are in the ministry now. They're active. Something is happening in this country. I think a lot of people are aware. I think white people still we all have a lot to learn about racial minorities. I think that we suffer a great deal by not knowing. I know that I feel so privileged by having had the opportunity of working with Yvonne Wanro, because she is, since this thing happened to her, in some ways, well, this kind of thing is never a blessing, but she has worked in her own behalf, and she has become very conscious of her own traditions, which she didn't know before. She was a poor woman, poor culturally and every other way, and she has become educated in her own traditions, and she has taught us, those of us who work with her, about what it means to be a Native American. And I feel so privileged to have learned these things that I didn't know. And I think that's true, and I felt this way about working with blacks that I learned. And I think many white people don't understand that we learn from getting into dialogue with racial minorities.
Dr. Les Hogan.
Dr. Nelson, you mentioned quite a few areas that have to do with the feminist movement, going back to the early 1900s and then right on up through some of the things you've experienced. But I wonder, just for our viewers and also for the panel, if you could define for us right now what today is a feminist.
Oh my, that's a hard one. I used to think it was a very easy thing to do. I mean, I used to define, in fact I did in my book, defined a feminist as someone who was active in working for equality for women. I don't think that's true anymore, because I know I've met a lot of women who I would call feminists who say, I'm not one of those women's libbers, but I believe in equal pay for equal work, or equal pay for comparable work, or I think that women have the right to preach in the churches, or whatever. But I'm not one of those women's libbers. And I think that is partly because I think the commercial media did a very bad job on the women's movement, or a very good job depending on whose side you're on. And I think they really made the movement, which is primarily, the women's movement is very conscientious women working very hard to create a better society. And I think they made a parody, where they tried to make a parody of it, with the bra burning and that kind of stuff. And that was always a very small piece of the movement, this kind of sensationalism.
It would include a lot of the things you've already mentioned, plus it also includes, you mentioned other groups, minorities, the aged, even
yes.
us poor men.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I think men are culturally deprived in being robbed of your right to your emotions. I think that's a terrible deprivation. And it's as though, well, I'm trying to think of a book that I just read. Oh, Towards a New Psychology of Women, Jean Baker Miller. And it's a brilliant book. She's a psychiatrist, and she talks about the fact that in our society we have many problems. Every society has many problems, and there's a whole set of problems about what you do about death, what you do about the real nitty-gritty of being a human being, and that all of these were lumped onto women, as though women are supposed to solve the social aspect of life. And because they're difficult problems, they were dumped on the women, and the women, of course, haven't solved them. No one solves the problems of living for other people. And men are deprived of even the right to ask these questions, to deal with what it means to be a human being, to be a feeling person. It's very difficult for men. So yeah, I think that the movement that I see as a human liberation movement is concerned with men, and it's concerned with old people, and it's concerned with children. And I don't think we talk enough about children. We hear there's a great deal of hysterical talk about abortion in terms of respect for human life, but what concerns me is what happens after a child is born. And in our society, we have have raised a very strange kind of setup where the child is expected to be raised by one or two people at the most, and is deprived of the love of a community and the knowledge of the adults of the community. The child has very little interaction with other adults or even other children. The child is primarily raised by this mother who then gets into a very intense relationship with him or her. And we see it. We see terrible neuroses of people from this kind of intense relationship. We see it in the mothers and we see it in the children. And it's a vast social problem that we have, I believe. And the child is also, because of the intensity of this relationship, the child doesn't have freedom to explore. I mean, it's always being watched by this adult, this cop, and is not given freedom to explore and to experiment, and freedom to make mistakes. And this is something I've learned from the Native American people that I've talked to. They call children little people, not children. We have a whole separate status for children, which is bizarre. I mean, it's also a very new thing. Children used to be little adults in our culture too. The whole notion of the child as a separate human being, separate kind of human being who doesn't have any rights. Children have no legal rights. That's a new thing, and I think it's a mistake. I think it creates problems.
Lou Reed.
Can we talk a little bit about solutions then in relation to this problem? We hear a lot about androgyny and the possibility of taking the positive aspects of both the masculine and feminine traits and trying to combine them in individual people. And well, one question: is this where the cutting edge of the women's movement is in trying to effectuate androgyny?
I've read a lot of material on androgyny, and I think the problem is that we can't talk about androgyny until we deal with the problem of discrimination against women, against blacks, against children, against old people. I mean, I think we have to be... The concept of androgyny tends to smooth over the real discriminations against these various groups, so that it seems to me you have to build into your consideration of that concept ways of ending real economic discrimination.
So androgyny may be a description of sort of a utopian kind of a situation, but it really doesn't tell you how to get there.
No.
And how do you think we can get there? Do you think that education, that schools are the answer, or is this something which is really going to take a social upheaval in the way we deal with each other and with families in order for children to grow up with a freer sense of freedom from a sex stereotype?
One of the things, I think one of the great contributions that the modern women's movement has made to all social movements has been the concept of process and the interaction between people. So I think that's absolutely critical, that we not only have to talk about organizations, large-scale organizations that can gain power for people, not power against people, but power for people. But the only way we can do that is at the same time to be concerned with our relationships with each other as human beings. That in the past, social movements have talked about political power, but they've not talked about this aspect, the human relationship aspect. And that's what the women's movement is concerned with. The women's movement, where it's effective today, is concerned with this notion of process, with hierarchy, with non-hierarchical groups, with developing leadership of everybody, of people developing their skills, sharing knowledge, sharing resources.
You're making an interesting distinction between empowering as a sense of getting political power and empowering in order to be sort of useful and effective in society, not necessarily then effecting large political change, but maybe gradual
I think both things need to
individual
happen.
change.
I think both things need to happen to effect real lasting change. It's happening now that there are small groups of women dealing with this, their interrelations. Most of them are not effecting any more permanent kind of change. So that, in other words, they're not building any kind of organization or dealing with power, except on an individual way. And, you know, maybe some of the individuals would get some goodies, but until they deal with the mass inequities, economic inequities, I don't think that they're going to be effective. Both things have to happen.
Bob Brown.
Idaho's legislature will be considering this coming year a displaced homemaker bill. And
Good.
of course, you have referred to this several times, and I'd like you to just to comment on some displaced homemaker bills that you might be familiar with in other states, and how we in Idaho could, what we should be working toward on this bill.
I guess California has the model displaced homemaker bill. I know that Baltimore, Maryland has one, and they have a home there. I was waiting for research on Baltimore, for information on the home in Baltimore, and I didn't get it before I left, so I can't really speak about that. But California has a center for displaced homemakers. So I think, and I know I was working on this in the state of New York, the bill that was before the legislature in New York was ineffective in that it only talked about education, and it did not talk about getting these women into jobs or creating jobs. It only talked about education. And I mean, I know a lot of women who've gone back to school after their children grew up, or after their husbands divorced them, or the marriage broke up. And they go to school for a few years and they still don't get a job, you know, or they get a job that doesn't use their skills. And the incredible thing, and it happened to me, I never would have believed it would have happened to me, that when I was married for 27 years, and then my husband and I grew apart and decided we would get a divorce, and he makes a good income, over $20,000 a year, and I had just was in the process of finishing my PhD, and, you know, like my standard of living went like this, you know, when we got the divorce. I lost my health insurance, you know, all these little things that I had, and health insurance, to buy health insurance at my age, you know, was very expensive, and I didn't have the money. And I have a PhD, so I'm in a privileged position much more than most women. I see it happening all the time. Women who have been married for years and worked so hard to raise their children and be effective, and suddenly the marriage breaks up for some reason, and there they are.
A follow-up to this on the Equal Credit Act that's recently gone into effect, you might want to comment. Did you have any problems as far as credit when you were first divorced, do you recall?
Well, I didn't run into them because I didn't have any money. So I knew I couldn't afford to buy a car. When my car broke down, I just went without a car. You know, I didn't even pursue it because I simply didn't have the money while I was going to school. And yeah, I know that I would not have gotten credit. I mean, I talked to other women who did not. And
right now,
I just learned to live without a car, and I learned to live without. Well, as a matter of fact, it's kind of important what happened. It was a struggle, but I think it's important. I learned to live without a lot of the trappings of middle-class life, and that I had thought I needed. And now I'm glad that I learned to live without them, because it means that I can be free. But now I feel that I'm making that choice, and that's okay. Then I didn't feel I was making that choice, and it wasn't okay. It was very scary.
Dr. Nelson, I would like to pursue a very large word, I guess, with you, with a capital R, and that's a question of reform. We're talking about political processes. And what brings this to my mind was a lecture by Professor Grant McConnell, who used to be head of the political science department at the University of Chicago. And in a presentation he gave recently, it was very interesting to hear him indicate that reform, as he defines it, has only been about 100 years in this country, and it's been very limited, in that he classified about 5 reforms, one being the Pendleton Act in 1883 dealing with civil service reform, and then the creation of the Interstate Commerce Commission was the second one, and the third one was the Progressive Movement in the first part of the century, but he indicated that dealt more with initiative, referendum, recall, and direct primary in the states. And maybe, number 4, the New Deal, he's not sure. And lastly is the decline of some of the powers and decisions of the president after Nixon and Lyndon Johnson. and he tended to indicate that such things as the ERA movement now and the civil rights movement in the 1960s was not a political reform as such. What do you perceive as reform and from a historical perspective, and what movements would you consider significant in this country under the label of reform?
Yeah, I would disagree with him. I think we've had many more reforms than that. I think the important thing to understand is what's happened to this country, happened to life in this country since it was founded. And certainly up until, kind of toward the end of the 19th century, this was a country of small businesses and cities that weren't too big and rural life, and people knew each other, and if someone was poor in the community, maybe the people who had money might give them some charity, which was degrading for the people who were poor, but at least they got something to eat. People knew each other, and they knew pretty much where their problems were. There was discrimination, but I think there was relatively more equality, certainly on farms. A farm family, the woman is working right alongside the man, and although she may not own the property in terms of their lives together, it's pretty equal because she's important, and the man knows she's important, and so he treats her pretty much that way. And she has the respect of her work, and she runs the garden, she has food, and that kind of thing. Well, we don't live in that kind of society anymore. The progressive movement, all those reforms around the progressive movement were primarily in terms of the fact that we became an international power, and we also became a society of big business and massive organizations, business organizations, huge. Now it's multinational corporations where a few industries and small groups of people own all of the wealth, or virtually all of the wealth, and most everybody else doesn't. Most everybody else doesn't have that kind of power, and small businesses are struggling to survive. And it's in that context that I think we have to talk about reform. I think the women's movement has effected important reforms, and I think suffrage is probably a minor reform. I think the reform's more in terms of our right to work, the labor laws that establish the right, establish protection of workers are essential reforms, because that's where most people are. Most people are going to work for somebody, and they have, it seems to me, the laws that have established their rights to a decent job, their rights to organize, to contract, those kinds of things are essential reforms. And then along with that, the whole, certainly the Social Security system, the protection of peoples in urban populations who can't protect themselves, who don't have jobs, all of those reforms, welfare. I mean, I don't think the welfare system's very good, but it certainly is a reform, because there's no longer, I mean, Lady Bountiful may want to take a basket to the poor, but she doesn't know where they are. She doesn't see them. She lives way off on the other side of town, or she may not even live in the same town. The people of the money don't see the people who are poor, so the government has had to pick up that kind of concern.
Dr. Hogan.
Dr. Nelson, I really, a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, but let's change the topic just slightly. And I noticed in your vita that you had taught a couple of classes, one called Politics and Health, and another one, Organizing Patients' Rights. Both of these, I think, in this day and age, have a lot of meaning for all of us. What kind of conclusions did you come to in the class Politics and Health? Let's just take that one to start with.
I think that we all need to be more active on our own behalf in terms of care about our body. That the medical system has become so fragmented and specialized that there's nobody who knows who you are as a body, or and certainly not as a human being. And so that we have to do that for ourselves, because the doctors do not do it. And I don't think it's any kind of maliciousness on their part. It's simply they can't do it. And then there's the whole business of drugs, and we are a drug society. And it's important that people understand what they're putting into their bodies. And it's important that we understand how those drugs interact with each other. For instance, one of the issues that I've been very much involved with is that of the estrogens for menopausal women. Now, there was a whole period when women were encouraged to take these estrogens on the basis of the fact that the belief that the estrogens would make the women, keep the women young and keep them desirable and keep them healthier. And we found out that that's simply not true, that all of that advertising about estrogens was not true, that the estrogens help a few women who are having strong symptoms of menopause, uncomfortable symptoms, but the estrogens also increase the woman's chance of coming down with cancer, of developing cancer. I mean, the estrogens are risky, and they also don't do all these other things. I mean, they do not keep women young. Nothing keeps people young. And what's, what we need to do, and what is the politics of health, is that why is it that anybody thinks that a woman is no longer attractive because she's middle-aged, so that she is put in a position of needing to take a pill to make, she's sold this idea that she's not attractive. And she sold it for good reason. I mean, there's certainly, there's a lot of men who are leaving their middle-aged wives to marry younger women. And but that's a political thing. That's not a medical thing. And it's this kind of understanding that I think is important. And we do that in our own behalf.
On the other topic that you taught, organizing patients' rights, one of the logical assumptions, of course, is a lot of the court cases that have been very big in papers and have sold a lot of newspapers. Is this basically what the class was about?
No. No, as a matter of fact, it was not. We didn't deal with that at all. We felt that, that was something that a lot of people are talking about. No, we were, again, talking about your rights to have complete information. We were helping people to figure out how to do that. And one of the most important reforms that we were working on was the notion of an advocate system where somebody goes with you. If you're sick and you go to an emergency room, it's very difficult to say, I demand such and such and such. You're grateful that anybody comes and if you're in pain, you want that shot fast. But you need an advocate. You need somebody who will say, now look, is that medicine going to hurt you? Who will be sure that you get help even if you don't have money. It's against the law to throw somebody out of an emergency room because they don't have money, but plenty of hospitals do it if that person is in critical condition. The hospital's supposed to treat them. Well, again, if you're half dead, you can't fight for yourself. That's the kind of thing, an advocacy system. And again, finding out what your rights are. Most people, or a lot of people, go to a doctor and the doctor says, you need an operation. So they go get the operation. Well, maybe what the person needs to do is go to another doctor and get another opinion and read a little bit on the subject. You can go to a medical library and read and find out what's really going on. Find out what other people know. Find out what the doctors know, and then make an informed decision.
Who read?
Well, Dr. Nelson, you were trying to cover the broad aspect of the politics of health, but nevertheless, I'm interested in knowing if you are concerned about the mood of the Congress and of the country in restricting the availability of abortions to low-income women. Do you feel that this is something that should be, is a major concern?
Yes, it's a major concern, and the people who are pushing for this kind of restriction are doing so on the basis of what they call respect for life, and I don't think that's true, because what will happen if abortions for poor women are restricted, and rich women have always been able to get abortions, middle-class women have always been able to get abortions. The people who died before we had a liberal abortion law were the poor women. And it's going to happen again. If they can't get abortions, they're going to go back to the butchers who will do it for them, cheaper. That's what's going to happen. And I think it's very dangerous. I really think it's very dangerous.
Can you assess this as a social historian in which you have action reaching out in sort of a liberal way and then a reaction. Do you see this as just a sort of a backlash, a minor backwash, I guess is what I meant to say?
I think it is. I think it certainly is a backlash in that people have gotten organized to oppose it, whereas they weren't organized before. I think a lot of the people who are doing this kind of work are not aware of what they're doing. I think they're not aware. I can't believe that the women who are saying that poor women shouldn't have abortions really know that this is going to risk the health of poor women. I think that they have been organized by various interest groups who would suffer because of these. For instance, I think big business has pumped a lot of money into the movement against the ERA. There are various interests that oppose the abortions for poor people.
Would you talk a little bit about how you feel about the opposition, the women who are opposing the ERA? You feel that that is big business is one aspect of that. How do you think what are women thinking who are working strongly against the ERA?
They've been given some very faulty information, and the things that I've read and the things that I've heard about these women is that they've been given faulty information. I mean, the movement from the time it was introduced in 1923 up until today, they're talking about things like mixed bathrooms. You know, that you're going to go into the bathroom and you're going to find men in there, and you know these things simply are not true. Or that I mean, you know, you fly on an airplane. There's one bathroom in that airplane, and you wait your turn. Or you live in a home with men and women, and there's one bathroom in that home, and you wait your turn. But there's been a tremendous amount of hysteria about mixing the bathrooms. Women will be forced to go out and work is probably the biggest one. That's false. It's not the Equal Rights Amendment that's going to force women out to work. It's our economic system that does not provide an adequate income for those women or for their husbands that forces them out to work. And they're going out to work now. And 43% of the labor force is made up of women, and we don't have an Equal Rights Amendment. And those women are working because they need the money. So I think that kind of thing it's false information.
What do you think it's going to take to get the ERA ratified?
I think it's going to take some hard work in those states where it hasn't been ratified. Some very hard work, some good organizing. I think it's going to take what happened in the suffrage movement. In the suffrage movement, these women, men and women, it wasn't just women, it's never been just women who have supported the women's movement, raised a lot of money, and they hired organizers who went out and spent full time working, just going door to door or farm to farm, talking to people about what the issues really were. And I think that's needed now. We need good organizers down there who can reassure the people who are opposed, who I think would vote if they knew, if they understood that this was not going to hurt them. It's going to help them if, in fact, they ever have to go out and get a job.
Evidently, the economic boycott of the states on this convention aspect of the states who haven't ratified is really having some effect. And
isn't that interesting?
Chicago is evidently facing a $12 to $15 million deficit from conventions that are not booking. And would you endorse further economic boycotts?
That's power, and that's I think that kind of thing is important because it shows women that they can be powerful in their own behalf. And you know, I think women really don't know that most of the time. Most of the kind of work that women do is interpersonal, you know, nagging, the shrew, because she doesn't know that she can be really powerful politically if she organizes. And that's really good news. I think that women should rejoice over this kind of thing.
Bob Brown.
Just pursuing a little bit, it's not only the NEA, the National Education Association, about 40 organizations, I think, have joined that boycott now. It's a lot of different groups. John Kenneth Galbraith coined an expression to describe sanctions and pressures that society put on women to keep them at home. He called it convenient social virtue. And it applies to the situation where the virtuous woman engages in intelligent shopping for goods, that she's creative and persistent in her care of the home and the garden and the household possessions. And if she gets a full-time employment out of the home, now not a career, of course, but that's unheard of, but even full-time employment, she suffers immediately from the judgment that she's neglecting her real work and is non-virtuous. I just wanted you to comment on that.
Well, one of the first things that I did when I was a young housewife, and I had 3 children, and I was working in the home. I did not have a job outside, and I began to work in the church, and I taught a class of young people, and I did that for a number of years, and it was a discussion group where they'd come and they'd talk about what was coming down with them, and what appalled me was how they hated their parents. It appalled me, and their parents were my friends, you see. I mean, we were all in the same church together, and I knew their parents, and these young people would say to me, "I don't see how you can stand my mother. I don't see what you see in my mother." And, I had to start thinking about that, because I was also a mother, and I thought, oh, wow, are my children thinking that way? So I began to explore it, and what I discovered was that these children did not see their parents standing for anything that was important in terms of the larger social concerns. And the fact that their parents' entire lives, this is what they saw, that their parents' entire lives were focused on them, the children, it made them very uncomfortable, as it would any person. If you felt that here was this whole social system focused in on you, and everything you did was being analyzed and examined, whereas they wanted their parents to be concerned with things that, well, let's use the word justice. They wanted their parents to be concerned with larger social issues. They saw them. They saw things happening. They saw poverty. They saw sickness. They saw war, and they needed a model of a complete human being, and that human being that they saw was limited. I mean, they saw that what they were doing was okay, but it didn't go far enough, and they wished that their parents would stand up and believe in something, do something. Even if it's ineffective, do something. Care about something besides your own little world. That we are social beings. We're never meant to just live with a couple of other people. All of human culture has developed in large social groups. I mean, large meaning even 15, 20 people talking to each other, caring about each other. And that's what made me start thinking. It was those young people that I was teaching that made me start thinking about my life and what I was doing. And here I am now, but it's been a long progression.
Dr. Nelson, that brings us to a question that I've asked several people who've been involved in work over the past few years of different social causes. And since you are here as an individual who is dealing with contemporary problems, but also as a student of history, I think this question is most relevant for you. And that is, as you go back, and you alluded to this earlier today, that the black man, for example, received some rights following the Civil War and the right to vote, and then very shortly following Reconstruction, he lost those rights. We have other times in history where different groups have won certain basic rights to become a really total part of the society, and then it was lost again. As you go across the country, and I assume from what you said, you find that there have been gains as you perceive them for different groups to some extent. And when you take that and relate it to history, are you somewhat concerned that this may be only a temporary gain, that what I guess I'm trying to get at is concerning the human race of all races and all religions and all backgrounds, will the human race ever arrive to that point that you are talking about, where each individual's really considered a total human being, and that many of these prejudices will disappear from the scene? Are we going to go back and forth, a step forward and a step back, and so forth?
I think that, yes, I think that we, in our lifetime, that we will see this kind of progress and regression, but I believe that I believe that our society is in imminent danger of, I think that the nuclear development is frightening, and I think the fact that there's 30 million people in this country who don't have enough to eat, I mean, I think we have serious problems, and I hope that people will become involved. I mean, I see people becoming involved, and if we don't become involved, I don't think we're going to survive as a society. I really don't.
Dr. Hogan, we have about 3 minutes.
I see Lou's list over. I should probably let her go ahead and ask some of her questions, but there is one. You mentioned when you visited Alice Paul that she said, okay, if you want to be one of us, then you go out and work. If I told you, okay, I want to be part of the feminist movement in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where would you tell me, white middle-class American male, to start?
I tell you to look around where you work and look at the employment situation for women where you work. Look at the employment situation for minorities where you work, and start there to be sure that there is active recruitment for women and minorities. Is that enough?
Start.
Let's just get back to Yvonne Wanro for just a minute. William Kunstler took her to a conference this last summer on heroes, and he was using her as an example of a hero or a heroine. And then Kate Millett was there, and she said that it was impossible for a woman to be a real hero in our society today. Do you consider Yvonne a real heroine? And is it possible?
I think what Kunstler was, I expect what Kunstler was talking about was more like a star. And in that respect, Yvonne is a symbol. She's a symbol for many women of the question of whether or not women are going to be punished if they defend themselves and defend their children. And there is now considerable movement to try to stop the violence against women and children, to raise to public recognition the tremendous amount of violence against women and children in our society. The Spokane area, this county has the highest rate of child battering in the state. Yeah, that's, when we talk about human life, we need to look at what's happening right where we live. And Yvonne is a symbol for people who are doing that struggle, which means that they don't know her personally. They don't know her as a human being. In this area, people have the opportunity of knowing her as a human being, because this is where she lives.
Dr. Nelson, we're right now out of time, and before we do close the program, if someone has been viewing our program and would like to talk with you while you're here, is there anywhere they could reach you? I know you're not here for very long.
If they will leave, I'm working through the Center for Peace and Justice, and if they will call and leave a message, I'm there sometimes, but they can leave a message, and that number is 327-8913.
With that, I must bring our program to conclusion. On behalf of our panel and our staff, I want to express our appreciation to you for coming and sharing your thoughts and experiences. We're grateful.
Thank you. I've enjoyed being here, and I've really enjoyed your questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Dr. Marjorie Nelson, dealing with the women's social movement from both a historical and contemporary viewpoint. May I invite you to be with us again next week on Channel 7 at the same time, when again we'll be interviewing a personality on a very important subject. And until that time, this is your moderator, Tony Stewart, wishing you a good evening.
The North Idaho College Public Forum can be seen at this same time each week over this station. This production was videotaped earlier by a North Idaho College student crew for viewing at this more appropriate time.